So for the longest time, there was a strategy in Commander that I didn't really enjoy all that much, and that was the Voltron strategy. The idea of suiting up a single commander and getting it big enough to punch somebody in the schnoz really, really hard. But yeah, in recent years, I've actually started to enjoy the ability to do that a little bit more due to some other mechanics that can be attached to those commanders. Now, I think when it's just like a bogle that you strap up with a bunch of auras, games can be quick but kind of boring. But if you introduce some other mechanic like, say, top deck manipulation, then things can get a little more fun. Introducing today's commander, Galea, Kindler of Hope. Now, I've already done a $15 deck tech on Galea, which means you know exactly what we're doing today. We're going to be looking at Galea through the lens of a full power deck upgrade. What do you do to make her stronger when you're not as considerate of budget? So this is going to be the version of the deck that I run in paper, actually, and have enjoyed for quite some time. Now, Galea is a fun commander. She lets you look at the top of your library at any point, and if you have an aura or equipment on top of your library, then you can cast those cards and drop them on the board without having to worry. You still pay their mana cost, but equipments, for instance, will automatically equip to Galea, and auras will automatically go onto the commander as well. But, well, they can go anywhere. You can drop them on a lieutenant if you want. There is one trap with Galea, though, that I want to warn you all of. It can be very easy to look at that equipment discount that she has and think, oh, I'm going to shove a bunch of swords in the deck. That's what I did. That's a trap. Don't do that. I'm just warning you, you're not going to have as much fun if you think you're strapping a bunch of swords to Galea. It feels like a fun time, but I had 10 sword Galea for a while, and it feels way more bad than it should. But let's get into the deck itself. The core strategy of our deck is going to be based on stacking as many enchantments as possible on Galea, while also trying to make sure that the enchantments we're dropping on her benefit from a board filled with enchantments. So let's go ahead and begin with the first section. Enchantments are win with all that glitters. The creature gets 1/1 for every artifact and enchantment we control. That's pretty simple. That's an easy payoff for just playing our deck. Ancestral Mask gives the creature 2/2 for every enchantment on the battlefield, so everybody's enchantments pay off for Ancestral Mask. Then we have Ethereal Armor, giving our creature 1/1 and first strike for every single enchantment we have. Helm of the Gods costs 1 whole mana due and also gives 1/1 for every enchantment we have. Thran Power Suit offers a little bit of protection with Ward and also gives our creature 1/1 for every aura and equipment attached to it. Strong Back, a new card from the Fallout series, gives our creature 2/2 for every aura and enchantment equipped to it, and also lowers the cost of cards that target it by 3, which is incredibly helpful in a deck like this. Speaking of cards with equip costs we don't want to pay, Nettle Cyst is in here as well, which gives the creature 1/1 for every artifact or enchantment we control. Bonus points, it creates a living germ that we can use to protect ourselves from edict effects that would otherwise make us sacrifice our commander, like Shieldred's Edict and Fleshbag Marauder. Then we have Idolized, which gives a creature XX, where X is the number of non-land permanents you control, meaning mana rocks, mana dorks, and also all of our enchantments will all go to benefit our commander. We also have 2 cards to make generic big swings possible, Finest Hour and Daybreak Coronet. We'll start with the Coronet. It gives our commander First Strike, Vigilance, and Lifelink. Our commander already has Vigilance, but the First Strike and the Lifelink is incredibly helpful in making sure that Galea survives combat and also keeps us in the game, where people are very incentivized to chip our life points down as soon as Galea starts hitting in the double digits in terms of power and toughness. Finest Hour also fixes one of the problems that you happen to have in a lot of Voltron decks, where you can eliminate one player and then another player eliminates you. Finest Hour gives us access to 2 combat steps, so we can go ahead and punch one player out of the game with Galea and then punch one other player out of the game with Galea, leaving one person left to stare at us wondering how it all went wrong. It's also super important to have ways to break parity in any commander deck, especially in a Voltron deck, and breaking parity is just the idea that when you and 3 other opponents happen to have established board states enchantments, and nobody wants to swing, and nobody can hit anybody because everybody's got blockers, everybody's got ways of chump blocking, preventing damage, they're maybe behind a propaganda or something. Everybody's protected enough so that the game state cannot push forward. We need to be able to break through that, so here are 6 ways of making sure that that happens. Beginning with Aqueous Form, this will give our creature unblockable and also gives us the ability to scry 1 whenever it swings. Remember that Galea lets us cast auras and equipments from the top of our deck, so we can use this to make sure that we have what we want on top of our deck. Scrying is always good in a deck like this. Then we have Armadillo Cloak, which will give our commander 2/2 trample and not lifelink, but something very, very similar. Whenever enchanted creature deals damage, you gain that much life. This actually stacks with lifelink, giving us double lifelink. But most importantly, this means if somebody were to steal our commander with an effect, our commander can no longer kill us so long as we can survive commander damage specifically. This is because anytime the commander deals damage to anyone, you gain that much life. You, not the player controlling her, you, the player who owns the enchantment. Then we have Griff's Boom, which gives a creature 1/0 in flying and has recursion. It can pop back into our hand for 4 mana. Indomitable Might will give our commander +3/+3 and the ability to assign combat damage as though it weren't blocked. Bonus points, it has Flash on it, so what you can do in this deck is hold an Indomitable Might on top of your deck via one of the effects we'll talk about earlier. Swing Galea into somebody. Bonus points if you swing in without a hand so that it looks like you have the ability to do nothing. Opponent blocks with all their creatures, and then you flash in the Indomitable Might on top of Galea, either saving her life or making it so that the Galea hits through completely, potentially lethaling a player. If you can get your hand dumped down to 0 before playing Indomitable Might, you get a ton of style points for dropping it off the top of your deck on a Galea. If you capture a moment like this happening, please send that video to me over on Twitter, and I can feature it in a later video, because I feel like that'd be one of the most hype things to do in a Galea deck. Then we have the Rune of Flight, which draws us a card when it touches the board, and also gives any enchanted permanent flying. It either will give one of our equipments the ability to bestow flying onto a creature, which means we can drop this on our Nettle Cyst or Thoran Power Suit, or the other equipments we'll talk about later, or we can just flat out give Galea flying. Either way, card's great. Drawing cards when you drop something that breaks parity is wonderful. And then we have Rancor, which gives a creature 2/0 and trample. And bonus, whenever Rancor is thrown into the graveyard from the battlefield, we get to return it to our hand. So not only do we get to make Galea incredibly dangerous with this card, but it's very, very sticky. It's very hard to take this away from us as the player, because no matter how many times we swing in, unless somebody responds to it with very, very specific types of removal, then we will be golden to keep on pushing forward with this card. Our core strategy also involves a little bit of recursion, because we do need to make sure that our deck is continuing to function. So we've got 3 recursion pieces here, starting with Tamiyo, Collector of Tales. The main reason Tamiyo's in here is to protect our commander. She makes sure that spells and abilities can't make us sacrifice permanents, but she also lets us choose any non-land card with a name. I mean, that's, all non-land cards. Choose a non-land card name, reveal the top 4 cards of our library, and put all the chosen cards into our hand and the rest in the graveyard, or we can neg her by 3 to return a card from our graveyard to our hand. Both of these effects are astounding for us. Either we get to recur an important game piece, or we can name the card that is on top of our deck, because with Galea out, we always get a chance to look at that card. And remember, she's still sitting here telling us that we are immune to Fleshbag Marauder style effects, which is so important in a Voltron strategy. Then we have Mantle of the Ancients, which can enchant a creature we control to give it 1/1 for every aura and equipment attached to it, much like other things in the deck. But unlike the other cards we've talked about, this will also reattach all of the auras in our graveyard, or equipments as well, to that commander. So if we get board wiped out, or we cast one of our own board wipes, like Ondu Inversion, then the Mantle of the Ancients will be here to keep us in the game. And then we have Bala Ged Recovery, because when your deck is at full power, it should have MDFCs. I'm not going to say it again. In fact, I'm actually going to say it many times. I lied. But no, Ballagate Recovery is amazing. 3 mana, return a card from your graveyard to your hand, and on the backside, it's a land if we need it to be a land. It's fantastic. It is amazing. The only thing that would be better in this deck is MDFCs that happen to be auras as well. Looking at you, Modern Horizons 3, please deliver. But that all said, that is all the recursion, or at least the flat recursion, that we are running in the deck. The next and thickest part of our deck is the Protection Suite. We are a Voltron deck, so it is imperative that we keep ourselves alive and keep our commander alive as long as possible. This is also where one of our deck's lieutenants will be, because sometimes you fail to keep your commander on the board, and that's okay. You shouldn't be punished just for losing your commander a billion times if you built your deck correctly and you have the ability to play a lieutenant. Anyway, let's get into the first one. Animal Friend. Enchant creature. Whenever this creature attacks, create a 1/1 green squirrel token and then put a 1/1 counter on the token for each aura and equipment that was attached to the creature that had Animal Friend on it, other than the Animal Friend enchantment itself. So basically, let's say our Galea has 3 auras on it. One of them is Animal Friend. The Animal Friended Galea swings in, creating a 1/1 squirrel that then gets 2 1/1 counters because of the 2 other auras or equipments that are on Galea. This now 3/3 squirrel sits on the board and does 2 things for us. In a world where we have a maximally powered up Galea and we kill a person and then Galea dies due to any amount of effects our opponents can have, this gives us a creature that is already big enough, if we have a fully suited up Galea, to be a threat when we suit it up instead. Alternatively, if we don't have a fully suited up Galea, this benefits us by letting us be protected from edict effects. Having the ability to spawn a token every time means that things like Sheoldred the Whispering One and Fleshbag Marauder and Plaguecrafter will not destroy our strategy like they normally would. Next, we have Bear Umbra, which will give our Galea 2/2, and Totem Armor, or I guess it's going to be called Umbra Armor now with the retooling of all these effects. But Bear Umbra gives our commander the ability to reset our lands anytime it swings, but the Umbra Armor specifically gives us the ability to protect our commander if it were to be destroyed. If the enchanted creature is destroyed by anything, we instead remove all damage from it and then destroy the Bear Umbra instead. Really important piece of protection that I'm glad has had its price drop down from the $20 it used to be down to $3.79. Thanks for that, Wizards. Then we have Canopy Cover, another way to break parity, but also, aside from giving our creature flying, it also makes our creature have hexproof. Enchanted creature cannot be the target of the spells or abilities our opponents control, so they can't just hit us with targeted removal anymore. Galadriel's Dismissal can phase out any creature on our board, and we can pay its kicker cost to phase out everything we have instead. This card is fantastic because for 1 mana, I can just say, don't kill my commander, please, go back to the drawing board. Then we have Shielding Plaques, which draws us a card when we play it, and also gives our commander hexproof. Then we have Shield of the Oversoul, which gives our commander indestructible and flying. Breaking parity is important, people. Then we have Robe of Stars, giving our commander a bigger booty, while also giving it the ability to phase out for 2 mana whenever it needs to. Phasing out is one of the best forms of protection you can have on a commander at all, as it does avoid practically every kind of removal. Then we have Mithril Coat, a card that will grant indestructible at instant speed to our commander, and we can circumvent the equip cost by immediately casting it onto our commander, since Mithril Coat can just drop onto any creature, which is fantastic. Then we have Sigarda, Host of Herons, which will give our... it has Flying and Hexproof to begin with, and it gives us Edict Protection. This means we don't have to sacrifice permanents while it is out on the board, which is a wonderful way to protect our commander. A lot of Voltron decks fail to circumvent edict effects a lot, and I think that being in Bant, we've got lots of ways to circumvent edict stuff, so that's really good for me. Then we have Swiftfoot Boots, which gives our commander hexproof and haste for all of 1 mana. Timely Ward, which can come down to instant speed if we have a commander, and give our commander indestructible. Another wonderful way to stack up auras on our commander that just keep it alive. And then finally, Teferi's Protection, which means that our life total can't change, and we gain protection from everything, and then all of our permanents phase out. A classic way to keep ourselves alive, and I want its price to keep going down because this card is really important to commander players who play white. so we need more access to it. Wizards, please, I'm begging you, put Teferi's Protection in a precon. You've already put crazier things in precons than Teferi's Protection. The next and most important part of any deck is the draw engine, how we plan on getting enough cards in our hand to viably play through our opponent's strategies. So we've got two different ways to do that here in Galea. We've got top deck manipulation, and then we have straight draw power. We need both of these, as Galea wants us to be manipulating the top card of our deck as often as humanly possible, so that we have access to cards there, because cards played from the top of the deck are basically free. So we've got 8 main draw pieces, and then we'll go into the other parts of the deck in a second. But let's begin with our Gothian Enchantress. She's got Shroud, and whenever you cast an enchantment, draw a card. Very basic, one of the OG Enchantresses, and she's a little expensive these days, but I enjoy her because she does have Shroud. Core Spirit Dancer works as a lieutenant for the deck and can be suited up alongside the commander. Whenever you cast an aura, draw a card. Enchantress's Presence lets you draw a card every time you cast an enchantment. Elvish Archivist is another wonderful card that I love suiting up in the deck. When an artifact enters the battlefield, put 2/1/1 counters on the Archivist once per turn, and if an enchantment enters the battlefield, draw a card once per turn. I've been in situations where I've had to suit this creature up because of the 2/2 counter she gets for just playing things like artifact lands. She's a really solid pick, and I adore her design. Then we've got Sage's Reverie, which will draw us a card for every aura attached to a creature that we slap it on, and of course we'll give it 1/1 for every aura that the creature has. We have Sithis Harvest Hand to gain a life and draw a card for every enchantment we cast, and SRAM Senior Edificer will give us a draw for every aura, equipment, or vehicle spell that we cast. Then we have the Pip-Boy 3000, which has a looting effect attached to it, as well as the ability to untap lands and put 1/1 counters on our creature whenever we swing, depending on what we need in that situation, though oftentimes the draw is what you're going to be focusing on more than anything else. Then, in terms of top deck manipulation, we've got 4 pieces for the deck, beginning with Miri's Guile. During your upkeep, you can look at the top 3 cards of your library and put them back in any order. Keep on using this effect so that you can guarantee that your draws are what you need them to be, and keep your enchantments on top of your deck so you can cast them essentially for free. Scroll Rack allows you to exile any number of cards from your hand face down, and then swap them with that many cards from the top of your library. Use this to perfectly stack up enchantments and equipment that you've drawn that you want to be casting with your commander instead of out of your hand. Then we have Sensei's Divining Top, which allows us to look at the top 3 cards of our library and rearrange them in any order, and then of course we can use the top to draw a card and swap it around, but oftentimes it's not going to be a thing that we are doing unless we're trying to save the top from a board wipe that we are using on our own turn. Then we have the Reality Ship and Equipment Jellyfish that will give us the ability to look at the top card of our library even when our commander isn't out, and if it's attached to a creature, we can play lands and cast any spells from the top of our library. This will give us the ability to filter out through lands on the top of our library when they are clogging up the top and we need to be digging further down for Galea. Also, if Galea's commander tax is too high, this can equip to one of our lieutenants and turn them into another copy of Galea for us effectively, giving us a powerful secondary strategy we have access to while trying to dig through our deck. Next, we do need to talk about removal. We can't just keep suiting up our commander and hoping for the best, so we need to have ways to end our opponent's strategies as well. To facilitate this, though, we need to leverage Galea's ability of letting us play auras from the top of our deck. Did you know? She lets us play any aura from the top of our deck. That includes auras like Darksteel Mutation that can enchant a creature, turn it into an indestructible insect, and strip it of all of its identity, all of its card types, all of its abilities. Everything goes away. Drop this on somebody's commander and make them cry tears of blood, because it's way easier to recast a commander than it is to get it from under a Darksteel Mutation. But don't just stick with the Darksteel Mutation. Kenrith's Transformation will do similar for us by turning it into a 3/3 elk, and will draw us a card when we play it. Imprisoned in the Moon will turn it into a land, which we can also use to our leverage. Song of the Dryads will turn it into a land as well, but this one is green colored. It also says enchant permanent, whereas the Imprisoned in the Moon can only get creatures, lands, and planeswalkers. Song of the Dryad can turn anything into a forest land, including a Bolas's Citadel. So have fun just dropping this on people's shit and making them cry. Speaking of cards that say enchant permanent, Minimus Containment can also do that for us by turning the card into a treasure. Try not to throw this one on commanders as often, because people will be more likely to just automatically blow this up by tapping their newfound treasure, but it still will work perfectly fine on anything you need to throw it on. Then we have some very flexible removal at instant speed in Generous Gift and Beast Within, and a singular copy of a counter spell so that we have instant speed reaction to our opponent's abilities. Though this is a flexible slot, you could add more counter spells if you wish. I'm sticking with just one for now because our protection suite includes lots of things like phasing and stuff like that. Then we have Kalani Ambush, which is an MDFC. It's a land on the backside, but it allows us to make Galea fight a creature we don't control. And of course, the fight mechanic is really good if you're a Voltron deck, since it's very hard for people to have stronger creatures than what we have available on the board. We typically will have the strongest thing on the board in any given circumstance. So having access to a land that can sometimes blow shit up like this is super helpful. Speaking of lands that can blow stuff up, though, we need to move on to the 3 board wipes the deck is playing, and each of them serves a different purpose. Onto Inversion is a freebie in our deck, because of course it is an MDFC, and it blows up all non-land permanents, which normally would be a huge downside, but remember, we have a few ways of recurring all of our auras onto our commander. We can use this for a reset and then a surprise win if we play our cards right. Then we have Single Combat, where every player will choose a creature or planeswalker they control and sacrifice everything else. And then players can't cast creatures or planeswalkers until the end of my next turn. Your next turn in this case. So Single Combat can be used to stifle everybody's board, tell the go wide player to stop building their board state in general, and most importantly, when we cast this, we don't lose Galea. This is effectively, as far as our deck build is concerned, an almost asymmetrical board wipe. This one, however, Cyclonic Rift, is a fully asymmetrical board wipe that you can overload to get rid of all the non-land permanents on your opponent's boards. Throw them all into their hands, and as long as they don't have a Reliquary Tower out, they're probably losing those cards forever, because they're going to have to discard down. Psych Rift is a card that people get fairly contentious about, so I will go ahead and just say, cast this card only when you desperately need to, or when you know you have the ability to win the game with a clear board state. These are ways of making sure the Psych Rift doesn't feel as painful for the other players. I don't know why people get as butthurt as they do about Psych Rift, but they do, so just play accordingly to what your pod's okay with this one. Finally, we need to talk about our ramp and mana base, and once again, we need to be keeping Galea's abilities in mind as we are constructing these. We can't just slap a bunch of rampant growth likes into the deck and expect it to do well when we desperately need to make sure that we have access to her ability. So, for instance, the card that I'm going to talk about right now is Wild Growth. There's a few cards like this. Pick as many of them as you want to throw into the deck. It enchants a land and lets it tap for an additional color when you have it on the land. So this effectively is ramping us by 1 for the low cost of 1. Wild Growth is really hard for an opponent to remove from the board unless they are doing a board wipe. Otherwise, it's very disadvantageous to just get rid of a card like this. It's a waste of resources for most people. But in our deck, uniquely, because Galea allows us to play the top card of our library, if it's an aura or equipment, we can play the Wild Growth on top of a land this way, ramping us and not going down on cards in our hand. In my version of the deck, I've chosen to run the Wild Growth and a Fertile Ground and also a Utopia Sprawl, because all of them let us go mana positive for 2 mana or under, which is what I'd consider to be a reasonable rate for most ramp, unless you're gaining something extra from that ramp. As I said though, add more of these to your deck if you want. This is just the amount that I am running in mine. But after that, we've got the classics of Soul Ring and Arcane Signet, and then we've got a Birds of Paradise and Noble Hierarch that I decided to go for instead of just ramping up on more ramp spells, because I am absolutely terrified of Edict effects, and I want to have creatures on the board to protect me from Edict effects. Speaking of which, we have a Sanctum Weaver as well, which will add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of enchantments you control. Again, a wonderful mana dork, but its main purpose for me, aside from ramping, is just keeping somebody from killing me with a Plague Crafter. That's what I'm mainly concerned with. I have had so many instances of being the person playing Savra and keeping a Voltron player out of the game by just sacking their commander over and over again, that when I built my Voltron deck, I decided that it was time to prepare heavily for that happening to me. Then we have Farseek, which will let us get any plains, island, swamp, or mountain from our deck and put it into play tapped. And then we have a Nature's Lore that can get a forest from our deck and put it into play untapped. Primarily, these will be used to grab either a Triome or Shocklands. But there are some scenarios where we are going to use these actually to manipulate the top of our deck for Galea. So, we're going to talk about the lands next, and you'll see why that is the case. With the very first lands we are going to have to talk about, these are the 3 Surveil lands, beginning with Meticulous Archive, but Lush Portico and Hedge Maze are all the same thing. They are typed lands, and I absolutely adore that Wizards made these for us. They are typed lands that can be searched with cards like Nature's Lore and Farseek, and they, like the Temples, which I don't like, these let us Surveil 1 instead of Scry. Surveil, in my opinion, is more powerful than Scry to begin with because of graveyards being an extra hand for a lot of decks. Even in ours, we can throw something there and then pull it up a Tamiyo multiple times, basically. But in general, having access to searchable top deck manipulation via this Surveil is helpful. I was very torn in my original build for the deck. I was bouncing between having Temples in the deck and not, and I eventually settled on not having Temples in the deck at all. But now that these are out, I don't have to make that awkward decision. I can just choose to play the lands I want to play, and these are lands that I really want to be able to play. Then we have 3 Shocklands, Temple Garden, Hollowed Fountain, and Breeding Pool, of course. Always say Submissive and Breeding Pool when you play this card. Then we have our 3 Pain lands in Adakar Waste, Brushland, and Yavimaya Coast. Then we have 3 Omni lands in our searchable Spara's Quarters, Exotic Orchard, and Command Tower. Keeping in our modes of 3, we have 3 Flip lands in Hennegate Pathway, Branchloft Pathway, and Bark Channel Pathway. And then we're running 5 fetch lands. That's right, 5. I normally only like running 3, but in Galea, it's important to have access to as many ways to manipulate the top of your deck as possible, so we are actually running 5 here. Though one of them is a bit of a cheatsy one. It's Crozon Verge. It gets a forest and a plains out of our deck and put it on the battlefield. I've seen some articles shitting on this card, and I just want to say they are all wrong. The ability to grab a Triome and a Surveil land out of the deck, ramping you up to Galea, because this happens on turn 3 typically if you get K-Verge early, is an absolutely astounding way to set up your game, set up your draws, be in a really comfortable scenario. And of course, it is a fetch land in every other aspect, aside from the coming into play tapped, that we have to suffer through. But after that, we've got Misty Rainforest, Scalding Tarn, Windswept Heath, and Flooded Strands as our basic fetching lands. Remember that we can sit on these for a turn if we need to, if we don't need the mana, and wait until we see the top of our deck and go, I don't want that. I'm going to swap it around. Or do things like throw cards that you absolutely don't want on top of your deck with Scroll Rack, and then get a shuffle with one of these cards. They are far more powerful when using top of deck effects than otherwise, so keep that in mind. Past that, we're running 2 check lands in Sunpetal Grove and Hinterland Harbor. I decided to stick with the green ones because, in my opinion, most decks need access to green faster than any other color. And then we have 4 basic lands in 1 plains, 1 island, and 2 forests. I originally had 3 forests, 2 islands, and 2 plains, and then I was given the gift from God that is the Surveil lands that basically took me away from any of those needs. In conclusion, that is the full extent of my Galea Kindler of Hope deck. I'll have a link to the $15 version in the description if anybody would like to play the budget version of the deck, but I think she is a fantastic enchantress or equipment commander, depending on how you want to build her. I leaned about 80-20, higher on enchantments, lower on equipments for my build, but obviously you can do whatever you want with your build. I just happen to really, really enjoy dropping a ton of enchantments down and getting lots of draw power as a result of that. There are other Bant Enchantress commanders you could pick as well to throw in the slot, but bear in mind that if you do, most of your top deck manipulation is going to have to be swapped out for other more generic draw power, because it will not benefit other commanders as much as it benefits Galea specifically. If you do decide to play her, though, let me know how she runs in your pods in the description below. If you've had bad luck playing Voltron in the past as well, maybe see if this deck is a good fit for you. I found that it helped me enjoy the strategy far more than when I just could not stand the way the strategy played out. All in all, I wanted to get another one of my full power upgrade videos out there, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Sorry that there's not going to be a Spicytech episode this week because not everybody is available and in town, but that all said, thank you all for watching. Hopefully you enjoy. A link to this deck is in the description below as well, and as always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability a Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Nabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.